Hi everybody, welcome back. We are starting a new module today about mood and tone. This is a part of our bigger unit on understanding authors. So today you're going to take what you learned last time about plot and conflict and character, and you're going to raise it up a level, and we're going to talk about mood and tone. So here we go. Okay, so mood and tone are tools that authors use to make writing more meaningful, and they help us understand what we're reading better. So we're going to talk about what's different about mood and tone, and we're also really going to dig into a story to see what authors do to show us what the mood is and what tone is. Okay, on this slide is where you probably should begin writing your notes. So if you want to use the note sheet, use the note sheet. Or if you want to use just a clean piece of paper, you can do that. But let's get a definition first of tone. Tone is the author's attitude towards the story's characters, the big subject of the story, or the audience. So tone is similar to the word attitude. So what's the author's attitude towards the subject of the story or the character? I like to think of attitude and then I cut that short to the word tude. And tude reminds me of the word tone. So has anyone ever had a tude towards a family member? I used to have quite a tude towards my dad. Has anyone ever heard a parent or grandparent say to you, "Don't take that tone with me"? Well, what they're really saying here is they're saying, what's your attitude? What are you what's your feelings towards them or towards, in this case, the author's attitude towards the story's characters, subject, or its audience? Don't take that tone with me. So that's a good way to remember it. In fiction, we see tone in two different ways, okay? We can see tone through diction, which means word choice, and also in its dialogue, which we know are conversations between characters. That's how tone is revealed. Now, mood. Mood seems a little bit more straightforward to me because you're going to write this down as well. Mood is the feeling the reader gets when you read a story. So it's how, like if I'm reading, how I feel because of what the author has written. So that makes it very different than tone, right? Tone is the attitude of the author towards something, but this is internal. This is how I feel when I read a story. So mood is developed really in a big way through the setting. Okay, so if your setting is on a rainbow with leprechauns and unicorns and hearts and fairies floating, you're certainly going to feel a certain mood. Now, if it's in a dark, dingy castle or a dungeon, that creates a certain mood. So often a reader will ask certain questions. Let's see. They may say, where is this story taking place? What, that's terrible highlighting. What's the weather like? You know, weather really contributes to mood. How does the author describe the particular environment? Is it clean? Is it dirty? Is it dingy? Is it bright and full of sparkles? Those things can really help us understand mood. So make sure you write that down. Mood is how the reader feels when they read a story, and it's developed by kind of the setting, the atmosphere, the environment, what's happening, and the way they describe the place where they are in a story and what's going on, okay? So that's the mood. All right, let's review. Tone and mood are not the same. They are not the same. Tone is the author's attitude towards a subject, you know, or a character. The tone is usually found by looking at the word choices and phrases they use, right, that the author uses. So you have to take time to look at the language. An author uses words to create the meaning and also the tone of a story. For example, if you are reading about a dog and it's described as lovable, that's positive. But one that's described as fierce and like a fighter, that would be more frightening, okay? So tone is is kind of understood by the word choices of an author. Okay? So mood is the feeling you get when you read. It's how you feel. And usually, you can feel happy or sad, suspicious, could feel lonely or exciting. You think of mood, you think of the atmosphere of the story. So you want to think about the setting and then the language the author uses to describe the setting. So that will give you a mood when you're reading. Tone, attitude of, the author's attitude towards the subject. Mood is how you feel. Put my finger in there. How you feel after reading. Okay, so here's a sample. It was a dark and stormy night. I sat alone in the old, dilapidated house, staring out the window. The sky was black, the wind was loud, and the rain slammed against the broken window pane. I shut my eyes, remembering my earlier visit, and I felt so embarrassed and angry. When I opened them, the lightning bolt flashed and it lit up the room once more. I had to get out of that house. I had to hide. No one could know my horrible mistake. I opened the door, took a deep breath, and ran into the cold and rain. Okay, so let's think about this. Let's start with the mood. Now, the mood is how you feel when you read it. So I see words about the setting, and I know that I look for setting words when I'm looking for mood. I see that it was an old, dilapidated house. I see that it was dark and stormy. It was raining and things were broken. So I can tell you that this does not feel playful. The mood doesn't feel peaceful. I feel like the mood is a little scary, a little regretful. This person seems to be worried about a horrible mistake. So the mood of this is a little dark. It's a little dreary. It's a little scary. That's how I feel when I read this. Okay? But now let's think about the tone. How does the author choose words to help us understand their attitude towards the subject? So I'm thinking about this person in a dark house. We're recognizing that they're shutting their eyes. They're remembering the earlier visit and they're feeling embarrassed. So they're telling me kind of some word choices here about their attitude towards the subject. They feel bad for the subject, it feels like to me, and they're in a terrible situation. So this feels not funny. The author is not being sarcastic. They're not criticizing. They're being pretty serious here about this person, but also I feel like the tone is a little worrisome for the person, for the subject here. So while I feel scared, it feels like the author, the tone is serious and maybe a little worrisome. Okay, a couple more, then we'll move on. What's the mood and tone of these brief paragraphs? Gently smiling, the mother tenderly tucked the covers up and around the child's neck and carefully, quietly left the room, making sure to leave a light shining through the open door should the child wake. Okay, so I want to see, how does that make you feel? That's going to be your mood. And then what's the tone? What's the author's attitude towards this situation? Right, write 2 words down, one for mood and one for tone. All right, next one. The laughing wind skipped through the village, teasing trees until they danced with anger and cajoling the grass into fighting itself, blade slapping blade, as the silly dog with golf ball eyes and flopping slobbery tongue bounded across the lawn. So what's the mood there? How does that make you feel? And then tone, what's the author's tone? What's the author's attitude towards this situation? Okay, well, when I read the first one, the gently smiling mother who's tucking the child in and making sure everything is nice, the mood to me, I feel comfort, I feel caring, and the author has a tone when he or she wrote this. The attitude feels loving and gentle is a good word I would use. And I know that because of some of the words the author uses, such as gently, tenderly, carefully. All of that kind of conveys a loving tone, right? Now let's go to the second one. With this, the mood here to me feels, I feel happy when I read this about the wind blowing through a village, and while the trees are dancing with anger and moving the grass in general, I see a dog playing around. So that makes me feel happy. And the tone is playful because it's using kind of this figurative language about the wind laughing and skipping. Okay, when we use figurative language that seems a tad silly, it makes for a playful tone. All right, so I think the mood I feel, the reader gets is happy, and the tone could be a playful tone. Okay, I am going to read to you, and I'm not going to have my picture up for this one, but I'm going to read this to you, and then you'll see some notes along the side. And our goal as we read is to think about what the mood and tone is of the story. And the story is called The Elevator, and it's by William Sleater, and it's one of my favorites. So let me begin, and then you can read along with me. You can take notes on if you want to print this out, or you can jot some notes as we go. But let's pay careful attention as I read, thinking about the mood, how you feel when you're reading it, and the tone, how the author feels towards the subject. The elevator. It was an old building with an old elevator, a very small elevator, which could carry only 3 people. Martin, a thin 12-year-old, felt nervous in it from the first day he and his father moved into the apartment. Of course, he was always uncomfortable in elevators, afraid that they would fall, but this one was especially unpleasant. Perhaps this was because of the poor lighting and the dirty walls. Perhaps it was because of the door, which never stayed open long enough and slammed shut with a loud clanging noise. Perhaps it was the way the elevator shuddered each time it left a floor, as if it was exhausted. Maybe it was simply too small. It seemed crowded, even with only 2 people in it. So what I'm seeing here is that Martin is a 12-year-old boy who's in an old building with an old elevator. It's a very small elevator, right? He talks about it being unpleasant and dirty. These are all word choices from the author. And also the elevator shudders, right? We're going to learn about personification later, but the shuddering elevator feels exhausted, right? And it seems crowded. Well, to me, so far, the mood is not great. I mean, he's not overly happy about this elevator situation. And I see words like dirty, afraid, dirty and uncomfortable, poor, and I know Martin hates using the elevator. Those are all important things that the author has told me. The stairs were no better. Martin tried them one day after school. There were no windows and the lights were not working. Martin's footsteps echoed behind him on the cement as though there was another person climbing, getting closer. By the time he reached his home on the 17th floor, he was gasping for breath. Sounds here too, like the lights were not working in the stairs, right? He was climbing, but he felt like someone was getting closer. He was gasping for breath. This sounds unpleasant too. And the idea that the author is saying that he felt someone was behind him makes me feel scared. So the mood is a little scary, and the tone, there's nothing lighthearted here. This is all very serious business. Martin's father worked at home. He wanted to know why Martin was out of breath. "Why didn't you take the elevator?" he asked, frowning at Martin. "You're not only skinny and weak and bad at sports," his face seemed to say, "but you're also a coward." After that, Martin always took the elevator. He would have to get used to it, he told himself, just like he got used to being bullied at school. Dad is kind of mean here. I wrote that in my notes. This is my reaction. If I look at the dialogue and what the author tells us, talking about him calling his son, at least in Martin's head, as skinny, weak, and bad at sports, And also I know he gets bullied at school. This again contributes to the tone of the story. When I think about the diction, the word choice, it's setting up kind of a situation where we feel bad for Martin and his situation. But back to the story. He didn't get used to it. He was always afraid that it would stop suddenly and he would be trapped inside for hours by himself. But it wasn't much better when there were other passengers. He didn't like to be close to them. He also disliked the way people tried hard not to look at one another, staring at nothing. Here we see words like trapped, afraid, and staring at nothing. He doesn't like to ride with people. All of that really is setting us up to know that this is not very positive. The tone isn't very happy. The tone isn't playful. And Martin is really worried. The mood I feel is I feel bad for Martin right now. I'm worried for him. I'm feeling a little anxious about his time in this new apartment with this elevator. Okay, let's turn the page. Okay, here we go. One morning, the elevator stopped at the 14th floor, and a fat lady got on. She was wearing an old green coat that ballooned around her. As she waddled into the elevator, Martin was sure he felt it sink under her weight. She was so big that her coat brushed against him, and he had to squeeze himself into a corner. There was no room for anybody else. The door closed quickly behind her, and instead of facing it, she turned around and stared at Martin. What in the world? Okay, I'm highlighting she turned around and stared at Martin because that's strange elevator behavior. Everyone can agree that that's not normal. People usually kind of back up and try to be away from each other. He looked at her for a moment. She had large, this word, fleshy cheeks and no chin, just a huge mass of neck. Her blue eyes were tiny but sharp. They seemed to be boring into Martin's face. Boring here means like drilling into his face. Martin looked away, but the woman didn't turn around. Was she still looking at him? He glanced at her quickly, then looked away again. She was still watching him. He wanted to close his eyes. He wanted to turn around and stare into the corner. But how could he? Fleshy cheeks and sharp eyes, I wrote here. I feel scared. Boring into him? Yuck. The elevator creaked down to 12, then 11. The piggy eyes were still looking at him. She had to be crazy. Why else would she stare at him like this? What was she going to do next? She did nothing. She only watched him breathing loudly until the elevator reached the first floor. At last. Martin wanted to run past her to get out, but there was no room. He could only wait as he turned and moved slowly out into the lobby. Then he ran. He didn't care what she thought. He ran nearly all the way to school. Okay, so many questions. Martin certainly seems stressed out to me. I feel anxious. The author is writing these thoughts so we can see how serious it is. There's nothing funny about this. The author is showing us that by giving us these questions to ponder. So this is a version of diction and dialogue. These are internal thoughts of Martin. So the author is setting a tone here by letting us see what's inside his brain, okay? Let's turn the page. He thought about her all day. Did she live in the building? He'd never seen her before, and the building was not very big. Maybe she was visiting somebody. But at 7:30 in the morning? It's too early for visiting. Martin felt nervous when he got back to the building after school. But why should he be afraid of an old lady? He felt ashamed of himself. He pressed the button, stepped into the elevator, hoping it would not stop, but it stopped on the 3rd floor. Martin watched the door slide open, revealing a green coat, a piggish face, and blue eyes, which were already staring at him as if she knew he would be there. It wasn't possible. It was like a nightmare. But there she was going up, said Martin, his voice little more than a squeak. She nodded and stepped on. The door slammed. He watched her pudgy hand move towards the buttons. She pressed not 14, but 18. The top floor. The elevator trembled and began to go up. The fat lady watched him. Let's look at our notes before we read on. Martin is trying to figure out his interaction here. He hopes she's just a visitor, but it's unlikely. Then when he gets on that elevator, ugh, she's getting back on. I'm so nervous here. The mood is anxious and scary. The setting of the door sliding open is too much. So I'm visualizing this situation, this setting of an elevator and slowly revealing the green coat, like it makes me freak out. So that's my mood. I'm feeling anxious and I'm scared. The tone is suspenseful, right? The author is saying it's, that he's kind of saying, are you going up? So he's asking questions, but he doesn't really want to. They use word choice like nightmare, the elevator tremble, and the door slamming. Those make the tone feel really suspenseful and also scary. So let's look at the last paragraph here on this page. The morning she got on at the 14th floor. So why did she get on the elevator at the 3rd floor today and go up to the 18th? The elevator seemed to be moving more slowly than usual. Martin wanted to press 7 so that he could get out and walk up the stairs, but he couldn't reach the buttons without touching her, and he did not want to do that. More questions here, right? He's got lots of dialogue, and he can't make sense of what's happening. Here we go. When the elevator stopped on his floor, she hardly moved out of his way. He had to squeeze past her, rubbing against her horrible, scratchy coat. He was afraid the door would close before he could get out, and she turned and watched him as the door slammed shut. Martin has to run. Now she knows I live on 17, he thought. Have you ever noticed a strange lady in the elevator? He asked his father that evening. Can't say that I have, he replied, not looking away from the television. Martin knew he was probably making a mistake, but he had to tell somebody about the woman. She was in the elevator with me twice today. She kept staring at me. She never stopped looking at me for a minute. What are you so worried about now? His father said, turning impatiently away from the television. What am I going to do with you, Martin? Honestly, you're afraid of some poor old lady? I'm not afraid. You're afraid, said his father. When are you going to grow up and act like a man? You're going to be timid all your life? Martin didn't want to cry in front of his father, so he waited until he got to his room. His father probably knew he was crying anyway. He slept very little. In the morning, when the elevator door opened, the fat lady was waiting for him. Martin stood there, unable to move, then backed away. As she saw him, her expression changed, and she smiled as the door slammed. Lots happening here. Martin finally builds up the courage to tell his dad right here, but his dad is being cruel and unkind. There's no comforting. So that dialogue really makes us feel, my mood, I still feel scared for Martin, but the tone here is really sad for me. It's not comforting. It feels really critical of Martin, the way that's playing out. I feel like poor Martin can't catch a break. And I'm shocked that that lady is still there in the elevator. Let's finish this up. Martin started running down the stairs. The stairs were dark and he fell. His father was silent on the way to the hospital. Disappointed and angry with him for being a coward and a fool, Martin had broken his leg and needed to walk on crutches. He could not use the stairs now. Was that why the fat lady had smiled? Did she know what would happen? At least his father was with him in the elevator on the way back from the hospital. There was no room for the fat lady to get in, and if she did, his father would see her, and maybe he would understand. So this tone is a little hopeful here. The author is saying, showing us that maybe things will get better now that Martin got hurt, but I'm not optimistic. Listen to why. When he got home, he could stay in the apartment for a few days. The doctor said that he had to rest as much as possible. Martin felt quite safe from the fat lady now. I'm going to put that here. That's different for Martin, right? We like to talk about when things change, how important that is. But then, here we go. This is back to reality. Oh, I almost forgot. His father reached out and pressed number 9. What are you doing? Asked Martin, trying not to sound afraid. I promised to visit Mrs. Ullman, said his father, looking at his watch as he stepped out of the elevator. Let me go with you. I want to visit her too, Martin pleaded, struggling to move onto his crutches, but the door was already closing. Afraid to be in the elevator alone, said his father. Grow up, Martin. The door slammed shut. Martin hobbled to the button and pressed 9, but it didn't do any good. The elevator stopped at 10, where the fat lady was waiting for him. She moved in quickly, and she was too slow to get past her. He was too slow to get past her in time to get out. The door closed, and the elevator began to move. Hello, Martin, she said, and laughed and pushed the stop button. Oh my gosh. The fat lady's back. How does she know his name? She pressed the stopped button. I am so scared for Martin. This feels like too much. It's so scary. So let's find out how you feel, what your mood is. The story ends here with a stopped button. All right, guys. So mood and tone. Mood is the feeling the reader gets from the setting and the atmosphere. The whole story we heard about the scary elevator, the dark stairways, the dirty, the dingy, the apartment, everything not working. I believe the mood was scary and suspenseful. I felt anxious. I felt worried. My mood, from reading this I was scared. I felt full of worry. And I think you probably did too. The tone, remember, is the author's attitude towards this subject. We see the tone from the words the author uses, the diction, and the dialogue. The dialogue really was hard for me. I feel like the dad was really cruel to Martin and not sensitive. To me, it was straightforward in that it gave a direct kind of report on their relationship, which was not good. He didn't take his son seriously or really seem to care about his son's worries and fears. To me, the tone is quite serious and straightforward. There's little reassurance that things will be okay. The tone is worrisome and, again, very serious. And there's a big piece of me that just wishes that Martin could find some kindness, but there's nothing in that represents kindness or a break for Martin. So I feel worried for him. I feel anxious. The mood feels that way. The tone feels serious and a little and scary a little bit, especially since there's no comfort from the father to the son. Okay, guys, so we've read that story. Now your assignment for this week is to read the story that we post on your own and pay attention to mood and tone. Remember also, you're going to notice character, conflict, theme, setting, etc. From Module 1. And then when you finish reading and taking notes, you'll answer the questions that are on the Google form and then post your answer to the discussion question that's also on Google Classroom. And that's how you'll get feedback about this. Now, let us know what you need. If you need help with the story, if you need help kind of differentiating mood and tone, we're happy to talk to you about it. You can do this. So just take your time, do good annotations, good notes, and then we'll provide you some information. So I want to make sure that you get in touch with us. Some of you text with teachers, some of you email, some of you call, whatever you need to do, and we'll get you started, okay? So good luck, and we miss you a lot. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.